Welcome back to Red Horizons, where we journey through the future in an attempt to better understand the present. I'm your host, Steve McPhail, and this is episode 3 of our 4-episode arc on Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy. This is Blue Mars, the long road to Utopia. After revolution and resistance, we turn to something even more radical, the work of Utopia. Blue Mars is the culmination of a grand vision, a sweeping narrative of rebuilding, remembering, and imagining. The war with Earth is over. The transnationals are broken. Mars is free. But freedom, as we know it, is never the end of the story. It's the beginning of a harder one. This is the story of how a society is built from the ruins of colonialism and capitalism, of how ideology becomes policy, how dreams crash against the rocks of reality, and how people, flawed, grieving, and divided, still try to build something better. Blue Mars asks, what does a post-revolutionary future look like? Can we escape the patterns of domination that shaped us? And what does it mean to found a world on justice, sustainability, and care? To answer these questions, we'll be drawing from a wide range of revolutionary and post-revolutionary thinkers. We'll look to Ernst Bloch, who reminds us that utopia is not a place, but a process of becoming. To David Graeber, who insisted that democracy is something we do, not something we inherit. To Achille Mbembe, whose reflections on post-colonial futures offer tools for imagining life beyond empire's lingering shadow. And to Elinor Ostrom, who helps us think through how communities can govern themselves fairly, flexibly, and sustainably. Because Blue Mars is more than the closing chapter of a sci-fi epic. It's a speculative constitution, a field manual for post-capitalist possibility, a call to build futures not from utopian blueprints, but from lived negotiation, collective memory, and enduring hope. So let's dive into the long road to Utopia, because if we don't build it, who will? After the revolution, memory, mourning, and the weight of the past. Blue Mars opens not with triumph, but with trauma. The revolution is over, but the Martians are not celebrating. They're remembering, counting the cost in lives, in landscapes, and in moral compromise. And that's precisely where Utopia must begin, not with a blank slate, but with ashes. The planet has changed, so have its people, and as Blue Mars begins, Kim Stanley Robinson reminds us that there is no clean break from the past. The characters we've followed for decades, Maya, Nadia, Michelle, Sax, Anne, are aging, wounded, and weary. They're not revolutionaries anymore. They're survivors. And survival leaves scars. Maya, once the passionate heart of the movement, is now struggling with dementia. She forgets names, places, even faces, but remembers with aching clarity the pain of loss. Michelle, The psychologist who once tried to understand the Martian psyche is consumed by guilt and a sense of failure. Even Hiroko, the spiritual matriarch of the underground, has vanished into myth. The first 100 heroes of Mars are becoming monuments, and like all monuments, they cast long shadows. Robinson doesn't idealize this moment. He shows us how revolutions age, how Utopia, if it's to exist at all, must account for memory and grief. This isn't the sanitized future of technocratic planners. In his essay, Necropolitics, Mbembe describes how colonial regimes rule, not just through violence, but through the management of death and memory. Even after the structures fall, the logic of domination persists, haunting the institutions, the landscapes, and the bodies of the formerly colonized. Mars may be free, but its people still bear the imprint of Earth's empire. And in Blue Mars, we see that trauma play out across generations. Take Nergal, for example, Hiroko's adopted son and the embodiment of Martian possibility. In Green Mars, he was a child of the underground. In Blue Mars, he becomes a diplomat, a symbol of unity. But even he struggles to navigate the psychic chasm between those who remember Earth and those born on Mars. For the older generation, Earth is a lost home or a defeated enemy. For Nergal, it's alien, both biologically and culturally. He can visit it, but he can't live in it. And yet, it's Nergal who begins to piece together a new narrative, one that holds memory and hope in tension, one that doesn't erase the past, but insists that another future is possible. It's here that we can bring in Ernst Bloch, whose monumental work, The Principle of Hope, reminds us that Utopia is never about forgetting. It's about unfulfilled possibilities that still burn within history. Bloch called this the not yet conscious, the dreams that exist in fragments, in songs, in struggles, waiting to be assembled into something whole. In Blue Mars, those fragments are everywhere. In the ruins of the old space elevators, in the shattered habitats of the southern hemisphere, in the faces of immigrants, refugees, and settlers who still argue over what Mars should become. The book refuses closure. It offers no perfect solution. It insists that Utopia is not a destination. It's a trajectory, one shaped by memory, mourning, and an unrelenting demand for something better. Even the landscape reflects this tension. Mars is no longer just red or green. It's becoming blue. Water is returning. Oceans are forming. The planet is changing, but not through conquest, through slow, collective work. Terraforming is no longer just a technical process. It's a metaphor for recovery, for repair, for building a new home on top of the wreckage of the old. This is where Blue Mars begins, with memory as foundation, not obstacle, with grief not as a weight to cast off, but as a compass for what must never be repeated. Because Utopia, if it's to mean anything, must be forged in full view of the past. Constitution of Mars, Radical Democracy in Practice. As Blue Mars unfolds, its central drama shifts from the struggle for independence to the struggle for coherence. Mars is free, but what now? How do you build a society that resists the gravitational pull of the systems it just escaped? How do you write a constitution that reflects not only liberation, but transformation? The Constitutional Congress at Dorsa Brevia becomes the narrative and philosophical core of Blue Mars. Delegates from every Martian faction gather in a sprawling tent city in the highlands, surrounded by mountains, memory, and mistrust. It is, in many ways, a miracle that they can come together at all. The Reds, the Greens, the underground Ariophany sects, the technocrats, the anarchists, the cooperatives, the new immigrants, they all arrive with competing visions and competing wounds. And yet, what emerges isn't just a compromise, it's something novel, a Martian democracy built not on conquest, but on cooperation. This moment is deeply resonant with David Graeber's understanding of democracy. In Fragments of an Anarchist Anthropology, Graeber argued that democracy isn't the inheritance of Western liberalism. It's an ancient global practice of direct deliberation, negotiation, and collective decision-making. Democracy, at its root, is what people do when they come together to solve shared problems. And that's exactly what we see in Dorsa Brevia. Messy, passionate, often frustrating, but real collective action. There are no philosopher kings in this moment. There are no singular visions imposed from above. What emerges instead is a polyphony of voices, each contributing to a living document, one that acknowledges ecological limits, social plurality, and the trauma of history. Mars will not be a replication of Earth's nation-states. It'll be a federation of autonomous bioregions. Governance will be decentralized. Resource use will be tied to sustainability. Economic life will be post-capitalist, grounded in a mix of cooperative labor, communal land management, and planetary stewardship. This is a radical vision, not utopian in the naive sense, but revolutionary in its process. The Constitution is not perfect. It's full of contradictions, but it's also negotiated in good faith by people who've lived through war and do not want to repeat it. That, in itself, is a kind of miracle. The character of Art, a political scientist and Earth-born refugee, becomes the avatar of this moment. He enters the Congress skeptical, assuming that Mars, like every other political body, will default to hierarchy and control. But what he witnesses instead is something different, a participatory system that works precisely because it doesn't seek perfection, but balance. Art's gradual conversion mirrors Robinson's own faith in praxis, in the doing of politics, not merely the theorizing of it. And here we turn to Elinor Ostrom, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Economics, whose work challenged decades of dogma about the so-called tragedy of the commons. Ostrom demonstrated that local communities can and do manage shared resources sustainably when they are allowed to govern themselves. Her principles, decentralization, transparency, adaptability, and mutual accountability, are written all over the Martian Constitution. Mars works because its people own the process, because they understand that abstract equality means little without material participation. The planetary scale of the Congress also raises deep ecological questions. Terraforming is now a fact. Oceans are forming, ecosystems are emerging, but who gets to decide what Mars becomes? What species are introduced? What landscapes are preserved? What regions remain untouched? These debates are not side plots, they're constitutional. This is where the influence of Murray Bookchin and social ecology also lingers. Mars's bioregional model, the idea that each geographic and ecological zone governs itself in accordance with local conditions, echoes Bookchin's call for libertarian municipalism, the idea that human freedom and ecological sustainability must go hand in hand, that politics must be scaled to the community, not the corporation, that life must be built horizontally, not vertically. What Blue Mars proposes, then, is not just a new government, but a new relationship between people and place. The Constitution doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it asks the right questions, and it commits itself to a process of ongoing revision, open dialogue, and shared responsibility. This section of the novel could have easily been dry or didactic, but Robinson fills it with life, arguments in the snow, debates that spill over into communal meals, flashbacks to past betrayals and hesitant reconciliations. This is not the sleek proceduralism of technocracy. It's democracy in motion, lumpy, alive, and driven by people who know that the future must be made, not inherited. In doing so, Blue Mars gives us one of the most powerful gifts science fiction can offer. Not a perfect world, but a plausible one. A future that feels reachable, not because it's easy, but because it's made by people like us. Earth and the Echo, Interplanetary Politics, and Ecological Limits. In the second half of Blue Mars, attention turns outward. Mars is no longer a dream. It's a functioning society, grappling with governance, ecology, and ideology. But Earth hasn't vanished. In fact, it looms larger than ever. Environmental collapse, political upheaval, and massive climate migration push Earth to its breaking point. In this context, Mars is no longer just a revolutionary experiment. It becomes a model and a threat. This tension defines the novel's interplanetary politics. Earth's rulers, fractured, fragmented, and still dominated by transnational elites, look to Mars with both envy and fear. For some, it represents hope, a society that has done what Earth couldn't. For others, it's a dangerous precedent, a rogue world that escaped the grip of global capitalism and dares to chart a new path. This dynamic echoes a pattern seen throughout real-world revolutionary history. Revolutionary Cuba was targeted not for its military power, but for its refusal to conform. Haiti was isolated not for its aggression, but for the audacity of Black liberation. In the same way, Mars becomes Earth's mirror, an unsettling example of what can emerge when people refuse to rebuild the old world. But the stakes are even higher now, because the ecological crisis has fully matured. Sea levels on Earth are rising. Entire regions have become uninhabitable. The capitalist world system that powered Earth's industrialization is in slow motion collapse. And Mars, once seen as barren and useless, is now not just a symbol of rebellion, but of survival. This is where Blue Mars becomes more than a story about planetary independence. It's a story about the planetary condition, a confrontation with the limits of Earth and the responsibilities of interdependence. Mars faces a choice. Will it become Earth's escape hatch, a playground for elites looking to flee the consequences of their own destruction? Or will it maintain its revolutionary integrity, offering not charity or refuge, but solidarity and mutual transformation? Nergal's journey to Earth becomes the lens through which we explore this dilemma. He's greeted not as a diplomat, but as an alien. His body, adapted to Mars's gravity, suffers under Earth's crushing weight. He walks differently, speaks differently, thinks differently. He's simultaneously admired and resented. His presence is a challenge, not just to Earth's rulers, but to its people. A living reminder that change is possible, that it's already happened elsewhere. Nergal's struggle to connect, to empathize, to build bridges across planetary and psychological distance marks one of the novel's most powerful arcs, and it forces us to reckon with a core truth. Utopia is not isolationist. A better world must be one that relates ethically to others, even, especially, those who are suffering. This is where the work of Achille Mbembe resonates once more. In his later writings, particularly Out of the Dark Night, Mbembe calls for a planetary ethics that transcends the colonial legacy of separation and hierarchy. He argues that post-colonial futures must be relational, not extractive, that liberation must include those left behind. Mars begins to embody this ethos, not through conquest, but through cautious, conscious engagement. There are no simple answers here. Some Martians argue for total separation, fearing that Earth's dysfunction will contaminate their hard-won society. Others advocate for aid, education, and limited migration. The debates are heated and unresolved, but what matters is that they're debated, that ethics, not just strategy, guides the conversation. The ecological stakes can't be overstated. Robinson doesn't let Mars off the hook. Terraforming itself remains controversial. Some, like Anne Claiborne, continue to resist it on principle, arguing that altering Mars is a new form of colonization. Others see it as a necessary adaptation. But everyone agrees the planet must be treated as a partner, not a resource. This deep ecological consciousness echoes the work of Donna Haraway, who insists in Staying with the Trouble that we must think in terms of kinship, not domination. For Haraway, the future isn't a clean slate or a high-tech utopia. It's a messy, entangled web of relationships between species, between worlds, between histories. Blue Mars lives in that mess. It doesn't offer purity. It offers practice. So when Nergal returns to Mars, he brings not Earth's pollution, but its urgency. Its reminder that liberation can't be walled off, that revolution without relationship is hollow, that the horizon of utopia must stretch beyond one world. This is where Blue Mars challenges the escapist tendencies of so much science fiction. It refuses to present Mars as a fantasy exit. It demands that we confront the world we have and imagine how solidarity might look across planets, across ecologies, across pain. Because if Mars has a future, Earth must too. Utopia in motion, time, change, and the politics of becoming. As Blue Mars draws to a close, we arrive at the most elusive and radical element of the novel: time. Not time as clockwork or calendar, but time as possibility. Because if the revolution is the break and governance is the bridge, then utopia is the horizon. Always present, always unfinished, always moving. Robinson does something rare in science fiction. He lets time stretch. Characters age, landscapes shift, political structures mutate. There are no final victories, no permanent solutions. Instead, there's a commitment to process, to what Bloch called the not yet, the persistent becoming of the world, shaped by hope, struggle, and unfinished dreams. This is a deeply dialectical approach. The Martian utopia is not a blueprint imposed from above, but a contradiction-laden, living experiment. Conflicts remain, inequalities persist, cultural divides linger, and yet there's motion, there's change. The people of Mars work at Utopia. They tend it like a garden, in full awareness of how easily it can rot or revert. Mars is no longer just a scientific project, it's a home. But that home must be constantly negotiated. What species are allowed to thrive? What technologies are introduced or rejected? What cultures are elevated, preserved, synthesized? There are no pure answers, only provisional ones, decided through dialogue, through science and spirit, through lived experience. In this way, Blue Mars invokes the feminist ecological vision of Donna Haraway once again, who argued that the future must be forged through situated knowledges, plural, contextual, always partial. Mars's path forward isn't based on mastery, but on entanglement. Haraway's idea of staying with the trouble is exactly what the Martians are doing, remaining present in complexity, resisting the lure of perfection or retreat. Take the character of Sax Russell, once a technocrat who believed in pure reason and technological salvation. Sax becomes one of the novel's most profound symbols of change. He learns to listen, to compromise, to feel. His journey from abstraction to embodiment, from control to care, is a mirror of the Martian project itself. Similarly, Anne Claiborne, the staunch opponent of terraforming, does not lose the argument. Instead, her voice shapes the terms of the debate. Her insistence on restraint, reverence, and humility informs the very structure of Martian governance. She's not marginalized. She becomes a conscience, a reminder that progress must be anchored in ethics, not just ambition. This evolution of characters across decades reinforces one of the novel's core truths. Utopia is slow. It requires memory. It requires humility. It requires the kind of long-range thinking that late capitalism has made nearly impossible. Here, Robinson's vision resonates powerfully with the late work of David Graeber, particularly his co-authored book, The Dawn of Everything. There, Graeber and David Wengrow argue that human societies have always experimented with equality, hierarchy, care, domination. The myth that history moves in a straight line, from foraging to farming to kings to capitalism, is just that, a myth. What matters, they say, is that we remember our capacity to choose, to build differently, to imagine expansively. Mars is precisely that, a laboratory for remembering possibility, for rejecting inevitability. It shows us that even in the wake of disaster, people can come together, can learn, can revise their values, not perfectly, not easily, but deliberately. And this process doesn't end. The novel closes not with a victory parade, but with motion. Nadia and Sax walk by a new ocean. Nirgal trains a new generation. Debates continue. Experiments continue. The work of the world goes on. Because utopia isn't a place we arrive at. It's a praxis, a politics of becoming. A refusal to surrender the future to the logics of scarcity, hierarchy, or despair. In Blue Mars, we're reminded that the road to utopia is long and winding and filled with grief. But it's also beautiful, it's also worth it, and above all, it's possible. A future worth fighting for. What Kim Stanley Robinson offers in Blue Mars is not a blueprint, a prophecy, or an escape. He offers a challenge, a demand, a vision of the future that refuses cynicism and embraces complexity. A future not free of conflict, but full of process. Not perfect, but possible. The revolution was necessary. The rebuilding was vital. But the real work, the deep, daily work, comes afterward, in shaping institutions, in healing wounds, in debating what kind of world we want to live in and who gets to decide. Blue Mars is about that work. It's about the price of freedom, the burden of memory, and the joy of starting again. This is science fiction at its most political and its most hopeful. It insists that utopia is not the absence of struggle, but its very ground. That radical democracy is messy, but worth the mess. That justice, if it means anything, must include the planet and all who dwell on it. And that revolution is not a single event, but an ongoing commitment to never stop imagining. In a world suffocating under climate collapse and political dead ends, Blue Mars reminds us nothing is fixed. People can change. Systems can fall. And when imagination is weaponized by action, it becomes power. Real, material, world-shaping power. So let's take that seriously. Let's imagine better systems. Let's mourn what we've lost. Let's build institutions that reflect care, cooperation, and consent. Let's treat the earth and each other as kin, not conquest. Let's reject the lie that there is no alternative. Because as Blue Mars shows us, there is, but only if we make it. Next time on Red Horizons, we return to Mars one last time, not to celebrate, but to critique. We'll examine the blind spots in the Mars Trilogy, from its whiteness and colonial metaphors to its limited vision of gender, ability, and political agency. Join us for Episode 4, Red Shadows, Blind Spots on the Martian Frontier. Until then, keep dreaming, keep questioning, and remember, the future is never neutral. You've been listening to Red Horizons, a podcast about science fiction through a leftist lens. If you liked today's episode, please consider supporting the show on Patreon at patreon.com/redhorizonspod. Every contribution helps sustain the project and keeps these radical conversations alive. You can also reach us with feedback, ideas, or book recommendations at redhorizonspod@proton.me. Original music by Parker Kent.